What if the very thing you shared, the thing you thought would set you free, is the reason you now feel empty, misunderstood, or quietly betrayed? Think about it. Have you ever revealed something deeply personal, something raw, unfiltered, vulnerable, only to regret it afterward? Maybe you shared a childhood wound, a dream that still felt fragile, or a spiritual experience that no one else could understand. And instead of feeling supported, you felt exposed, misread, or even dismissed. You see, not all truth needs an audience. And Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, knew this all too well. He believed that some secrets aren't meant to be shared recklessly, not because they're shameful, but because they're powerful, sacred, and when revealed to the wrong person or in the wrong moment, they don't just lose meaning, they drain your life force. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how can we become that when we scatter our most intimate truths into spaces that don't hold them with respect? We live in a time that worships oversharing. We're told that vulnerability is strength, and yes, when it's intentional, it is. But there's a thin, dangerous line between authentic vulnerability and spiritual self-betrayal. And that's where today's video begins. Because there are certain truths, shadow secrets, Jung called them, that when shared too freely, don't free you at all. They fracture you. They create emotional debts you never meant to owe. They invite opinions, projections, and judgments that have nothing to do with who you really are and everything to do with how others see the world. In this video, we'll explore 5 types of secrets that when shared carelessly can quietly erode your energy, your boundaries, and even your destiny. We're diving deep into Carl Jung's shadow work philosophy, the psychology behind inner boundaries, and real-life examples of how too much truth can become a silent sabotage. Because the goal isn't to stay silent. The goal is to learn when to speak and when to protect your soul like it's the most precious thing you'll ever carry. So if you've ever felt raw after sharing too much, if you've ever sensed that the wrong person now holds a piece of your truth, or if you're simply curious why your secrets hold more weight than you thought, stay with me. Because by the end of this video, you may finally understand. It's not about hiding who you are. It's about holding who you are with wisdom, with intention, and with self-respect. Let's begin with the first secret one that nearly all of us carry, yet few are ever ready to name. Deep personal insecurities, not the surface-level doubts we joke about with friends. I'm talking about those quiet, aching fears, the ones that whisper, "I'm not enough. I'm too broken. I'm unworthy of love unless I prove myself." These aren't just passing thoughts. According to Carl Jung, these are shadow seeds, deep-rooted fragments of the self that were rejected, shamed, or ignored early in life, often in childhood, often in silence. Maybe someone once told you that you were too sensitive, or maybe no one said anything but their absence spoke louder than words. You learned to shrink, to perform, to hide. And over time, you buried that part of you under layers of, "I'm fine." But here's the thing, when you finally decide to open up about these insecurities, especially to someone who hasn't earned that trust, it can backfire painfully. Jung warned us about this. He said people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And sometimes that includes projecting their discomfort onto yours. Let me share a real-world example. Imagine a man who grew up in a household where vulnerability was mocked. He's now in his 40s, successful on paper, yet still haunted by a voice that says, "You're a fraud." One day, in a moment of courage, he opens up to a coworker, reveals that as a kid, he felt invisible, always trying to earn love. And what happens? The coworker, uncomfortable with depth, brushes it off. "Yeah, childhood's tough for everyone. You just gotta move on." That moment of courage gets met with a wall. No empathy, no space, just the cold sting of minimization. He walks away, not feeling lighter, but exposed. And worse, ashamed for ever speaking. This is why Jung emphasized discernment in the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming your whole authentic self. Not every truth deserves to be spoken in every room, and not everyone has the capacity to hold your softness without breaking it. You see, when we share our deepest insecurities too soon or with the wrong person, we don't heal, we hemorrhage. Because we're not just giving information, we're offering a piece of our inner child. And when that's dismissed or distorted, it doesn't just hurt, it reinforces the original wound. So what can we do instead? Here's a question to reflect on. Am I sharing to be seen? Or am I sharing to be saved? Because if the answer is the second, we may still be hoping that someone else will carry the parts of us we haven't yet claimed. But healing doesn't work that way. Carl Jung believed that our shadows aren't meant to be dumped onto others. They're meant to be integrated, witnessed by us first. So when it comes to your deep personal insecurities, those parts of you still tender, still healing, treat them like sacred ground. You don't owe that story to everyone. You owe it to yourself to hold it with reverence until you find a space safe enough to share it without bleeding. Let me ask you something before we move to the next secret. Who have you given your truth to that didn't deserve it? And what would it look like to reclaim that part of yourself? Take a breath with that, and remember, your insecurities aren't flaws. They're old echoes of a time when you needed love and received something else. They don't define you, but they do deserve protection. Let's talk about something that's often misunderstood, something not everyone has the words for, but many have felt. Spiritual or mystical experiences. Maybe it was a dream so vivid it felt like a message. Maybe it was a moment of silence where you felt the presence of something greater, or a brush with death that left you more alive than ever. Whatever it was, you knew it meant something. You knew it changed you. But the moment you tried to share it, you saw it in their eyes. That look, like you were either too deep or just a little off. Carl Jung deeply respected the spiritual dimension of the human psyche. He believed that mystical experiences weren't delusions. They were invitations, messages from the unconscious, glimpses of the self trying to awaken. But he also warned, the most important problems in life are not to be solved, they are to be outgrown. You see, Jung understood something most people don't. These moments of inner awakening aren't always meant to be explained, at least not right away, and definitely not to just anyone. Why? Because spiritual experiences are fragile, not weak, not imaginary, but personal, sacred. And when shared too soon or with the wrong audience, they can be ridiculed, distorted, or dismissed, leaving you questioning your own sanity. Let me share a real example. A woman survives a near-death experience. In that suspended space between life and death, she feels overwhelming peace, sees visions that transcend time. When she comes back, she tries to tell a close friend. And what does she hear? That's just the brain shutting down. You imagined it. No space, no curiosity, just rational dismissal. And so she begins to withdraw, not just from the conversation, but from her own truth, What was once an awakening now becomes a private confusion. This is the shadow side of sharing sacred moments. It's not just that others may not understand. It's that their misunderstanding can make you doubt what you do. That's why Jung urged caution. He believed these encounters with the divine should be integrated, slowly held close, meditated on, explored through dreams, symbols, and quiet reflection before being spoken into a world that often lacks reverence. So here's a question for you. Have you ever had a moment that felt too deep, too mysterious to explain? And when you tried, did you feel more seen or more separate? It's important to know you're not alone. The modern world often demands facts, logic, and proof. But your soul doesn't speak in bullet points. It speaks in symbols, in synchronicities, in feelings that make no sense but also make everything make sense. So when you have a spiritual or mystical experience, remember it's not always meant for public consumption. It might be meant just for you, at least for now. Because here's the truth Jung knew well. Not all sacred things survive exposure. Sometimes silence is protection. Sometimes secrecy is wisdom. You're not weird for what you've felt. You're just walking a path that doesn't have a map. And the moment you try to explain that path to someone who's never walked it, is the moment you risk being misunderstood in a way that hurts. So what can you do instead? You write it down, you meditate on it. You read Jung or the mystics or people who've been where you are. You surround yourself with those who listen without trying to fix you. And above all, you trust your own experience. Because as Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. So protect your awakenings. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Give them time to grow strong before you offer them to the world. And ask yourself, what truth have I experienced that I've been afraid to honor just because no one else has seen it? That truth might be your compass, even if you're the only one who sees where it points. Let me ask you something. Have you ever poured your heart out to someone only to wish you hadn't? Not because they hurt you intentionally, but because the moment just wasn't right, or worse, you weren't ready. We all have feelings that run deep. Frustration, longing, heartbreak, and sometimes intense love that feels so pure it almost frightens us. And in those raw moments, we want connection. We want to be seen. But what happens when we share our emotional truths before we've made peace with them? Carl Jung warned us about this. He called it projection risk. In simple terms, when we don't fully understand an emotion within ourselves, we end up projecting it onto someone else. And when we do that without awareness or preparation, it can backfire. Let's take a closer look. Say you've just come out of a painful breakup. You're sitting across from someone new. They seem kind. You start to talk about your past relationship, about the betrayal, the sadness, the deep disappointment. But halfway through, you realize they're not really listening, or worse, they look uncomfortable. And suddenly, instead of feeling heard, you feel exposed, maybe even a little ashamed. What just happened? You shared something that was still bleeding, something that hadn't scarred over. And in doing so, you gave someone else power over a wound you didn't yet understand yourself. This is the danger of unfiltered emotional truths, not because emotions are bad, not because vulnerability is weakness, but because timing and emotional readiness matter. Jung believed that before we bring our emotional truths into the world, we must first contain them, reflect on them, understand them, and integrate them. Otherwise, we end up handing over our inner world to someone who might not know how to hold it, or worse, might not want to. There's another example worth mentioning. Think about someone who confesses love too early, not because they genuinely feel secure, but because they're afraid of being alone. That confession, while emotionally true in the moment, isn't grounded. And if the other person doesn't respond the same way, it creates shame, rejection, and often resentment. So here's a question to consider. Is the emotion you're sharing something you've processed, or are you hoping someone else will process it for you? That's the line between healing and harm, between healthy vulnerability and emotional dependence. Now, don't get me wrong, sharing is powerful, but there's a difference between expressing from a place of self-awareness and leaking from a place of confusion. Jung often said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When we share unprocessed emotions too soon, we're letting the unconscious run the show. We're mistaking a cry for clarity. And that's when relationships begin to suffer, not because we're broken, but because we didn't give ourselves time to fully understand what we were feeling. So what can you do? Pause. Reflect. Journal before you confess. Speak to yourself before you speak to someone else. Ask, am I sharing this because it's true, or because I need someone to fix it for me? There's incredible power in silence, not the kind that hides, but the kind that heals. When you take the time to sit with your anger, your love, your sadness, and understand its roots, you grow. You become more whole. And when you finally do speak, your truth has weight. It has clarity. It doesn't beg, it resonates. So the next time you're tempted to spill your soul in the name of honesty, pause. Ask yourself, is this for connection or is it a cry for rescue? Because the person who learns to sit with their emotions before sharing them is the one who builds real power, real trust, and real relationships. That's what Jung meant by inner work. Not silence for silence's sake, but silence that helps you hear yourself more clearly before inviting the world to listen. Let's talk about something that almost all of us carry in silence: betrayal. Not the kind you read about in stories, but the kind that cuts deep. The kind that changes how you trust, how you speak, how you love. It could be the friend who abandoned you when you needed them most, the parent who never showed up emotionally, the partner who promised forever and walked away. And the truth is, when you've been betrayed, there's a storm of emotion building inside. Anger, grief, shame, even a desire for revenge, however quiet. So what do most of us do? We talk, we vent, we tell someone, maybe even a stranger, about the person who wronged us. We say their name. We replay the story. We narrate our pain like a badge. And here's where things get dangerous. According to Carl Jung, not all sharing is healing. In fact, some sharing, especially about betrayal, can keep you trapped in the very story you're trying to escape. Why? Because when you speak from a wound that hasn't been processed, you're not just sharing, you're reliving, you're reinforcing your identity as the victim. And that's where the shadow sneaks in. Jung believed that when a betrayal remains unforgiven, not just toward the other person, but within yourself, it begins to fester. And the moment you speak about it from a place of bitterness or retaliation, you give it new life. It becomes more than a memory. It becomes your script. Think of it like this. You were hurt 5 years ago, but every time you tell the story with that same sting in your voice, you make it feel like it happened yesterday. You reinforce the pain neurologically, emotionally, and energetically. You might feel momentary relief, like releasing pressure from a boiling pot, but long-term you're cementing yourself in a role, the one who was betrayed, the one who was left, the one who was wronged. And that role can be a cage. Let me give you a real-life example. There was a woman I worked with in a healing circle. She had been cheated on by her husband a decade ago. She'd moved on, remarried, had a good life. But every time someone brought up infidelity, even in a movie, she'd launch into a bitter monologue about her ex. The betrayal was still alive. And the more she spoke it, the more it fed her identity, not as a survivor, but as someone still bleeding. Now, this doesn't mean you should never talk about what hurt you, but timing, tone, and intention matter. Here's a self-check question Jung would likely approve of. Am I sharing this to heal or to hurt back? Because here's the trap. When you speak about betrayal with unresolved emotion, it's often not about being understood. It's about wanting justice, control, or validation. That's not healing. That's projection. That's shadow work left undone. Jung believed that true transformation only happens when you stop identifying with your wounds, not by erasing them, but by integrating them with awareness. That means owning your pain without letting it own your voice. So if you've been betrayed recently or decades ago, here's what I invite you to consider. Have you allowed yourself to truly feel it privately without performing it publicly? Have you written it down, screamed into a pillow, meditated with it, without needing an audience? And most importantly, have you begun the work of forgiveness, not for their sake, but for your own liberation? Because sharing your story with someone too early, too raw, or with the wrong energy, can keep you energetically tied to a person you don't even want in your life anymore. And ironically, it gives them more power than they deserve. So don't let your truth become a trap. Let it be a lesson. Let it be a fire that forged your strength. But don't let it be the narrative you whisper in every new chapter of your life. Some secrets are not about hiding. They're about healing in silence. Until you're ready to speak from wisdom, not from wounds. That's the kind of power Carl Jung was pointing toward. The kind that doesn't need revenge because it's too busy transforming. Let me ask you something honest. Have you ever had a dream so personal, so daring that you told someone about it, and suddenly it felt smaller? Maybe it was a business idea, a book you wanted to write, a move to a different city, or a bold new version of your life you could almost taste. But then you shared it too early, too casually, and someone raised an eyebrow, laughed a little, or worse, gave you that look. The one that says, "Who do you think you are?" And just like that, a part of that dream began to dim. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He believed that our deepest ambitions, the visions that call to us from the unconscious, need protection, not premature exposure. In Jung's words, the psyche is a garden, and a dream, especially in its infancy, is like a seed. If you expose it too early to the outside world, before its roots have formed, it withers. Not because it wasn't good enough, but because it wasn't ready for the weight of judgment. This isn't just philosophical. Psychology today calls it premature disclosure. Neuroscience has shown that when we speak about a goal before taking action, our brain releases dopamine, the same satisfaction we get from actually doing the thing. But here's the catch. That hit of validation tricks your system. It can actually reduce your motivation to follow through. It's like letting the steam out of a pressure cooker before the meal is ready. You see, every idea has an energetic life cycle, and some ideas are so sacred, so soul-tied to your identity, that sharing them before they've matured is like opening the door of a cocoon before the wings have formed. Let me share a real story. There was a man, early 40s, burnt out in corporate work. He had a dream of opening a small retreat center in the woods, something deeply connected to nature and healing. He told his family about it one Thanksgiving. The room went quiet. Someone laughed. Someone said, "That's not very practical." Within a month, the man shelved the plan. Not because he lost the dream, but because he lost the energy behind it. Jung would say he leaked the soul of the idea before it was strong enough to survive. So here's a new way to think about ambition. Protect your visions the way you would protect a fragile flame in the wind. You don't hide it out of shame, you shield it out of reverence. And sometimes even those closest to you aren't the right audience for your early stage ideas. Not because they're cruel, but because they see you as who you've been, not who you're becoming. And that's okay. In Jungian terms, this is part of the individuation process, the sacred journey of becoming fully yourself, a path that often begins in solitude. Not isolation, but inner alignment. So what do you do with your ambitions if you don't announce them? You nurture them, you write them, you build private rituals around them, you let them grow roots before they bloom. You take small, consistent action, not for applause, but for momentum. And when the time is right, when the dream is no longer a wish, but a truth you've stepped into, then share it, but only with those who've earned the right to hold it gently. Let me leave you with this reflection. What dream of yours have you whispered too early, and what would happen if you took it back? Not out of shame, but to give it a second chance to grow stronger. Your ambitions are not just ideas. They are soul messages, nudges from the deeper parts of you. Honor them, protect them, and remember, some of your greatest transformations begin in silence. So let's take a breath and come back to something we often forget in a world obsessed with exposure and oversharing. Not every secret needs to be spoken to be healed. Some truths are sacred, not because they're shameful, but because they carry power, power that grows in silence, not in performance. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that journey, it's not about telling everyone everything. It's about learning discernment, about knowing the difference between hiding out of fear and protecting something because it's still becoming. There's a quiet wisdom in that, a strength in knowing what to hold close while it matures, because some wounds aren't ready for an audience. Some dreams need a private place to breathe, and some emotions are meant to be understood before they are spoken. We live in a world that celebrates exposure. Social media urges us to share everything, our struggles, our goals, our pain, our joy. And yes, vulnerability is powerful when it's intentional. But unfiltered vulnerability shared too early with the wrong people that can turn healing into harm. You don't owe your story to anyone who hasn't earned the right to hold it. And maybe that's what maturity really is. Not silence out of fear, but silence out of sacredness. A choice to guard your energy, to process privately, to grow roots before you bloom. So let me ask you sincerely, what's one truth you're learning to protect, not to hide, but to honor? Maybe it's a desire, maybe it's a boundary, maybe it's a version of yourself that no one sees yet. But you do. Whatever it is, you don't need to explain it to the world right now. You just need to stand beside it. Witness it. Let it grow in its own time. Because when it's ready, you'll know. And it will no longer feel like a secret. It will feel like a part of you that's finally whole. So if you're on a journey of healing, of integrating your shadow, of understanding yourself more deeply, this channel is for you. Subscribe if you're ready to reclaim your energy and live more intentionally. We explore topics like self-awareness, emotional boundaries, and psychological healing through the lens of Jungian wisdom. And if this video resonated with something deep inside, you leave a comment below with the words, "My energy is sacred." It's not just a phrase, it's a reminder, a quiet declaration that says, I no longer give my power away recklessly. I choose to hold it, honor it, and grow from it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And most importantly, thank you for honoring the parts of you that are still becoming. We'll see you in the next video.